Thank you, Brenda, for being here today. And I want to thank you for being a part of the process. And when we set out and created the School Safety and Security Working Group back in April of 2018, we set out to answer the question, are we doing everything we can to keep our children as safe as school as possible? And I want to thank you and your team at DESP for providing that. It's been quite a journey. It's been a very long learning experience. And as you know, we've gone back and forth. We've heard from superintendents and teachers and police chiefs, et cetera, down the line. And while I appreciate your testimony, just a few questions for you, because I think that possibly some of the problems that we're having is a lack of communication between districts and DESP. And again, I want to preface this by saying we know it comes down to funding. And if you don't have the funds available to staff certain departments or staff them adequately, then of course services will have to be reduced, and we get that. What we wanted to do is send a message to try to improve the process. Obviously, the system's not perfect. It probably will never be perfect, but we want to improve the process. And we wanted to come up with ideas, notions, and begin the dialogue back and forth to see what we could do to improve the process. So that being said, on the third part of the bill, it talks about requiring the department and the School Safety Infrastructure Council to report on implement simplified documents. So we heard from, excuse me, many school officials that yes, they've applied for grants, yes, they've gone through the process, but that the process was very tedious and it was very difficult. So we thought, let's start a dialogue on trying to make the process a little simpler. We understand it's complex things. These are facilities, these are schools. This can't be a one-page document that to submit and say we want money to do this. We understand there's architectural drawings involved, but we just thought we would start the dialogue on what we could do to make the process a little simpler. So in your experience in working in the department, do you think that there's any room for improvement there?
Well, there's always room for improvement. The requirements of the grant program were initially established in Public Act 13-3. And they're pretty stringent. The schools are required to have a plan in place. And one of the things we've done to make it easier for them, because what we see is generally school systems are really trying hard to put the plan in place and to make sure that they're making their kids as safe as possible. But it's difficult sometimes to get that first plan in place. Once it's in place, then you're better off. And so what we've done is we've said, look, we will assist you in putting your plan together. We will assist you in the grant documentation, and we will start to provide you with the reimbursements. We will withhold the final reimbursement until you have your plan in place. So we have a very flexible system. Our number one goal is to make sure people are as safe as possible. So we're not going to withhold, even though we're technically required under the statute to withhold the funding until they have a plan in place. We do work with them on that. We also have, just like we have that email address for if you have a question on the standards, we have the same thing on the grant side. So our grant people work with all of the schools that have applied and make sure that they have what documentation is required. I don't think we go to the level of architectural drawings. There's also the construction services side of the Department of Administrative Services, which also has school construction grant programs. That may be where some of the more complexities are. But there are specific things that Public Act 13-3 said that school systems could get and other things that they could not. And so we work very closely with the schools themselves to make sure that the documentation is in place. And Public Act 13-3 sets the parameters for prioritizing schools. So we also work with them as well on that.
Sure, and I agree with a lot of your points, especially on 13-3, which is obviously a state law, which can be amended. I know it's a bill that was passed after the Sandy Hook tragedy, but it's something that if there are points in there that can be looked back 6 years later and say we could do it a little bit better or a little bit different, I think that's something that this committee would be willing to look at. I'm not saying that we need to eliminate or modify everything, but if there's some areas that in practical application would work, I'm sure I'll be in contact with your office.
And I do have a suggestion on that. There's within 13-3, which is codified in 10-292RB. It's an odd situation. There's an asterisk that says look at basically 13-3. I think that the assessment, the school assessment that's suggested in that original legislation, we now have probably a better assessment checklist, if you will, that's right in the plan template. So that's an example where they're being required to use something that might be a little bit obsolete, and that's something we could certainly work with you on.
And in section 4 of the proposal, and this is something we heard from a lot of people, and I've heard anecdotally as well, that schools have approached the state asking for, we want to hire a school consultant, because realizing that the state was strapped for money, didn't have the funding available to provide school security consultants to every school district in the state of Connecticut. In a perfect world, we would, because like you said, our mission is to keep people safe. That being said, they would reach out and say, we want to hire a security consultant to do this. And a lot of times they were told, just, look it up, figure it out. We don't have any list you can use. I understand your point about the liability, and I'd be more than happy to include some sort of S language in the bill that would provide for a limited liability of some kind. That's really a question for our attorneys. But having the consultants on a list that you could have school districts reach out to would be a tremendous assistance and help, so that they wouldn't have to go and do research and look at websites and look at reviews and call other agencies. It would be just, in my vision of it, would be a list of people that could be called, emailed, contacted, and the school district knows that they've been vetted in some ways, that they're not just Joe Smith working out of his basement that'll help you fix your school up. It's going to be someone who has done this before, who has experience, who is tried and true, and kind of has that that ability. So that was our intention with number 4. Do you believe that within your available department right now, within available appropriations, that's something that could be done? And I'm not saying in a month or 2, but is that something that over a period of time could be accomplished?
There's 2 things I would say to that. The first is a general comment about the assessments. There's a checklist within the template that gives schools a fairly simple checklist to follow on an assessment. At DESP, we have a number of different units that will provide an assessment, and we're also working on an assessment curriculum so that schools will be able to do it themselves. So that's sort of a separate issue, but we are making a lot of progress on helping all schools have a resource available to them that comes from the state. With regard to the contractors themselves, a couple of concerns, and I am a lawyer, so I think that's probably where the liability language came in to a certain extent, but I also think that there is the best answer that a school system can get on a good consultant is to talk to other school systems in Connecticut that have used that person. So what we could do maybe is set up some kind of a system where if a school has hired them, they could have a rating system that we could put together that would be available. Because the concern I have is that we're looking at it top down as the state, and these are school systems that are actually dealing with a consultant and would be able to, we could maybe help set up what the rating system would be so that people could look online for that. So yes, I guess there's room for something we could do.
Thank you very much for taking the time today to be here.
You're
Look forward to working with your office in the future on this important matter. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.